My parents lied about my inheritance while I paid every bill, so I cut them off and watched them panic in silence without explaining anything. I'm a 27-year-old guy, and for as long as I can remember, I've been the reliable one in my family, the one who never caused problems, never talked back, never needed much. Growing up, I was praised for being mature, calm, and responsible, but what that really meant was that I learned early how to stay quiet and carry weight that wasn't mine. My parents used to say things like, "You're the strong one," or "You understand us better than your sibling," and I wore those words like a badge, even when they hurt. From a young age, I was taught that loyalty meant sacrifice. Love wasn't something you asked for, it was something you earned by being useful. If I helped enough, gave enough, stayed patient enough, then I mattered. That idea settled deep in me. It shaped how I saw family, duty, and myself. I learned not to complain, not to ask why, not to expect balance. My parents praised my maturity constantly, especially in front of others. "He's so responsible," they'd say with proud smiles. But behind that praise was pressure. They leaned on me emotionally, venting their stress, their fights, their fears. Then it became financial too. Small things at first. "Can you cover the internet this month? We're short on groceries. Just until next paycheck." I told myself it was temporary. I told myself families help each other. I remember handing over cash at the kitchen table, the smell of old coffee in the air, the TV murmuring in the background. My mom would sigh in relief. My dad would nod and say, "You're a good son." That approval felt warm, even addictive. Meanwhile, my sibling lived a completely different reality. They were protected, excused, defended. Mistakes were brushed off. Responsibilities never landed on them. If they messed up, it was stress, bad luck, or someone else's fault. I noticed the imbalance, but I swallowed it. I believed my role meant something. I truly thought that one day, all this sacrifice would turn into trust, fairness, maybe even security. I didn't know yet that I was quietly being trained to give, and never ask for anything back. I didn't notice when helping turned into obligation, but it happened slowly, almost politely. What started as just this once became routine, and routine became expectation. By the time I was in my early 20s, paying bills wasn't a favor anymore, it was just assumed. Electricity, internet, groceries, random emergencies. My phone would buzz and I already knew what the message would be before opening it. "Can you cover this real quick? We'll pay you back next month. You know things are tight right now." They always said it gently, like they were asking for a glass of water, not another chunk of my paycheck. And every time I hesitated, even slightly, the mood shifted. My mom's voice would soften in that disappointed way. My dad would sigh and say, "We thought you understood how hard this is for us." The guilt came fast, heavy, and familiar. They framed it as teamwork. Family helps family. They reminded me how mature I was, how dependable. "You're the only one we can count on," my mom would say, looking at me like I was her anchor. I didn't feel proud anymore, I felt trapped, but I nodded anyway. Saying no felt like betrayal. Meanwhile, my sibling floated through life untouched. No bills. No pressure. No lectures about responsibility. If they needed money, it appeared. If they messed up, it was brushed off with excuses. "They're still figuring things out," my parents would say. I wanted to scream that I never got that grace, but the words stayed stuck in my throat. I started delaying my own plans. I skipped opportunities. I told myself stability mattered more than dreams. I worked more hours, cut back on things I enjoyed, and learned how to live tired. At night, I'd lie in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying conversations, wondering why helping my family felt so heavy. Still, I convinced myself this was temporary. That one day they'd look back and see everything I'd done. That my loyalty would mean something real. That eventually, fairness would show up and balance the scales. I didn't realize yet that every time I paid without question, I was teaching them exactly how much they could take and how little I expected in return. I started seeing the contrast more clearly once I stopped making excuses for it. My sibling wasn't just treated differently, they lived in a completely separate reality. While I stressed over overtime hours and bank balances, they drifted from one mistake to another without consequence. Missed payments, bad decisions, half-finished plans, none of it ever stuck to them. Somehow, it always became someone else's problem. My parents talked about them with a softness I never received. "They're sensitive," my mom would say. "Life is harder for them." My dad would shrug and add, "They just need more time." Meanwhile, I was expected to already have everything figured out. If I struggled, it was framed as a personal flaw. If I asked for help, I was reminded how strong I was supposed to be. There were moments that still sting when I replay them. Sitting at the dinner table while my sibling complained about money, and my parents immediately turned to me with that look. Not even a question, just expectation. "You can help them out for now, right?" My fork would pause midair. Everyone would go quiet. Saying no felt like lighting a match in a room full of gas. When my sibling messed up, it was not their fault. When I hesitated, it was disappointing. I remember once pointing out how unfair it felt. My mom laughed awkwardly and said, "You're overthinking it." My dad changed the subject. That was the moment I realized my feelings made them uncomfortable. I started keeping things inside. Resentment, exhaustion, confusion, all of it stayed buried. On the outside, I stayed calm, dependable, reasonable. On the inside, I felt invisible. Like my value only existed when I was useful. The strangest part was how normal it all felt. This was just my role. The responsible one. The backup plan. The safety net. I told myself every family had dynamics like this, that sacrifice was part of love. But deep down, something began to crack. I started noticing how quickly my parents defended my sibling, and how easily they dismissed me. I began wondering when, exactly, I had agreed to be the one who carried everyone else. And for the first time, a quiet, unsettling thought crept in: what if this wasn't temporary at all? The first time my parents mentioned inheritance, it wasn't dramatic or formal. It slipped out casually, almost like a reassurance meant to calm me down. We were sitting in the living room late one night, the air heavy with that familiar mix of exhaustion and obligation, when my dad said, "Don't worry, everything will be fair one day. You'll be taken care of." My mom nodded quickly, adding, "You know we'd never forget everything you've done." Those words stuck to me. They felt like a quiet promise, a future reward for all the sacrifice I was making now. Whenever I felt stretched too thin, I replayed them in my head. "You're not being used. You're investing." That's how I framed it to myself. I told myself that loyalty had a long memory, and that my parents saw more than they said. After that, the idea of what would happen later started coming up more often. Not in details, never details, but in hints. "When everything's settled someday, or when our assets are sorted out, or you'll understand why we needed your help." Each time, it softened my doubts just enough to keep me compliant. It felt like a carrot held just out of reach. Whenever I questioned the imbalance, my mom would gently remind me, "You're different. You're responsible. You'll be fine no matter what." My dad would add, "Your sibling needs more support. You're strong enough to handle things." Somehow, strength always meant sacrifice. Fairness was always postponed. I started to believe that asking too many questions about money or the future made me look greedy. So I didn't. I swallowed my curiosity along with my frustration. I told myself that good people didn't keep score. That family wasn't transactional. That trust meant patience. But late at night, lying in my room, I'd stare at the ceiling and do quiet math in my head. Years of bills. Thousands of dollars. Missed chances. Delayed plans. And still, no clarity. No paperwork. No real conversations. Just promises floating in the air. I clung to those promises anyway, because without them, I'd have to face a harder truth that I might be giving everything without any guarantee of being protected in return. And that thought was too heavy to sit with, at least not yet. The pressure didn't ease, it multiplied. What used to be occasional help turned into constant crisis management. Every month brought a new urgent problem, always framed like bad luck instead of a pattern. A late bill. A sudden repair. A loan that somehow became my responsibility. My phone started feeling heavier in my hand because every notification carried the same quiet dread. "Just this once," my mom would say, her voice tired but expectant. "We're really stuck right now," my dad added, and I'd feel that familiar tightening in my chest, the unspoken rule pressing down on me: good sons don't say no. I started covering things automatically, barely even arguing anymore. My paycheck disappeared almost as soon as it came in. I'd sit at my desk late at night, spreadsheet open, trying to stretch numbers that refused to stretch. I skipped outings, delayed plans, told friends I was saving. In reality, I was barely staying afloat. What hurt more was how invisible my effort felt. There was no appreciation anymore, just expectation. If I hesitated, the tone changed. My mom would get quiet and wounded. "I thought you understood what we're dealing with." My dad would sigh heavily and say, "We didn't raise you to turn your back on family." Those words landed like accusations, not conversations. Meanwhile, my sibling remained untouched by any of it. They still asked for money freely, still made careless choices, still lived without consequences. When I pointed this out once, carefully, calmly, my parents snapped. "Don't compare yourself," my mom said sharply. "They're different." Different somehow always meant protected. The imbalance started eating at me. I felt stretched thin, emotionally and financially, like a rope pulled too tight. I'd lie awake listening to the hum of the house, replaying every conversation, every guilt-loaded phrase. My chest felt heavy all the time. I was tired in a way sleep didn't fix. Still, I kept going. I told myself this was just a rough phase. That families go through pressure. That things would stabilize. That once the chaos settled, the fairness they promised would finally appear. What I didn't realize was that the pressure wasn't temporary at all, it was a system. And I was the one holding it up. The shift didn't happen with a fight or a confession. It happened by accident, the kind of accident that rearranges your entire understanding of your life. One evening, I came home earlier than usual and overheard my parents talking in the kitchen. I wasn't trying to listen. I just froze when I heard my name, followed by a tone I didn't recognize. My dad said, casually, "We already handled the paperwork. It's better this way." My mom replied, "He doesn't need to know yet. He'll be fine. He always is." My stomach dropped. I stood there, heart pounding, barely breathing. They were talking about assets. About arrangements. About making sure my sibling was secure. My name came up only as an afterthought, not as a beneficiary, but as someone who could manage on his own. I remember gripping the doorframe, feeling the blood rush in my ears. My mind tried to reject what I was hearing. This had to be a misunderstanding. They'd promised fairness. They'd implied balance. They'd reassured me for years. But their voices were calm, practical, final, like this decision had been made long ago. Later that night, I couldn't sleep. The house felt different, colder. Every memory replayed with a new filter. The praise. The pressure. The promises. I started connecting dots I'd never allowed myself to see. What if the inheritance talk had never been reassurance, but control? Over the next few days, I paid closer attention. Little comments slipped out. Defensive reactions when I asked neutral questions. Awkward silences where answers should have been. I began quietly checking things I'd never questioned before: documents left out, conversations cut short when I entered the room, vague explanations that didn't line up. The more I looked, the worse it felt. Something had been decided without me. Something big. That realization cracked something open inside my chest. I felt stupid. Used. Naive in a way that made my skin burn. All those years of sacrifice suddenly felt less like love and more like strategy, not mine, but theirs. And for the first time, the thought crept in, fully formed and terrifying: what if I was never meant to be included at all? I didn't confront them. Not yet. But from that moment on, nothing felt solid anymore, and the ground beneath my loyalty started to give way. I didn't confront them right away. Instead, I went quiet in a way that felt new, not obedient quiet, but observant. I started paying attention to details I'd ignored for years. The tone shifts. The half-finished sentences. The way conversations stopped the second I entered the room. It was like I'd stepped behind a curtain and suddenly saw the strings. I began checking things on my own, carefully, almost guiltily. Old emails. Paperwork left on the dining table. A folder I'd never been told about. Nothing dramatic at first, just fragments that didn't line up with the story I'd been fed. Mentions of accounts I didn't recognize. Notes with my sibling's name where I expected to see both of ours. Dates that went back years. Every small discovery made my chest tighten. I kept thinking, maybe I'm misunderstanding. Maybe there's a reasonable explanation. I wanted to be wrong. I needed to be wrong. But the pattern kept repeating, too consistent to ignore. I tried asking gentle questions, pretending curiosity instead of suspicion. Hey, I saw something about the paperwork, is everything already sorted? My mom's smile stiffened instantly. Why are you worrying about that now? She asked. My dad cut in quickly, saying, you don't need to stress about those things. The conversation ended there, shut down like a door slammed softly but firmly. That reaction told me more than any document ever could. I started noticing how defensive they became whenever money or the future came up. How quickly they changed subjects. How my siblings suddenly avoided eye contact when I entered the room. The house felt tense in a new way, like everyone was guarding a secret I wasn't meant to touch. At night, I replayed everything. The praise. The pressure. The promises. I realized how perfectly the story had been crafted: keep me busy, keep me giving, keep me hopeful. My stomach twisted with a mix of anger and humiliation. I wasn't just overlooked, I was being managed. The worst part was recognizing my own role in it. How easily I'd accepted scraps of reassurance instead of clarity. How badly I'd wanted to believe loyalty would protect me. By the end of that week, the truth was impossible to ignore. Whatever inheritance I thought existed for me wasn't real in the way I'd been led to believe. And once that thought settled in, something inside me quietly broke and started hardening at the same time. The moment it fully hit me wasn't dramatic. There was no shouting, no big reveal. It was a quiet night, alone in my room, staring at my phone after checking my bank balance for the third time. Rent was due. A bill reminder blinked on the screen. And earlier that same day, my mom had casually asked if I could help out a little more this month. Something inside me finally cracked. I remember sitting on the edge of my bed, elbows on my knees, feeling hollow. Not angry yet, just empty. Like all the energy I'd used to hold myself together had finally run out. The realization landed slowly and painfully: I wasn't a son to them in the way I thought. I was a safety net. A backup plan. A wallet with feelings they didn't really want to acknowledge. I replayed years of moments in my head. Every time I'd said yes when I wanted to say no. Every time I'd swallowed frustration to keep the peace. Every time I'd been praised for being easy or understanding. It all sounded different now. Those weren't compliments. They were instructions. The worst part was the shame. Shame for letting it go on this long. Shame for defending them when friends hinted something wasn't right. Shame for believing that love had to hurt this much to be real. I felt small, foolish, and deeply alone. That night, I barely slept. My chest felt tight, like something heavy was sitting on it. I kept thinking about how replaceable I seemed, how easily my role could disappear the moment I stopped paying. The thought scared me more than I wanted to admit. If I wasn't useful, what was I to them? The next morning, my mom texted me early. Can you send the money today? We're short again. No concern. No greeting. Just expectation. I stared at the message for a long time, my hands shaking. That was my lowest point. Not because I was broke, but because I finally understood the truth I'd been avoiding. I wasn't part of the family structure the way I believed. I was the support beam holding it up, and no one cared what happened to me as long as I didn't collapse. Something inside me went quiet then. Not angry. Not loud. Just, done. And in that silence, a decision began to form, one I hadn't yet admitted to myself, but couldn't unthink anymore. I didn't denounce anything. I didn't argue. I didn't confront them or demand explanations. I just went quiet in a different way than before. This time, it wasn't the obedient silence they were used to, it was deliberate. Controlled. Internal. I started watching instead of reacting, listening instead of explaining, planning instead of hoping. I stopped volunteering information about my life. When they asked how work was, I gave short answers. When they complained about stress, I nodded without offering solutions. It felt strange at first, like I was breaking an unspoken rule, but also oddly grounding. For the first time, I wasn't trying to manage their emotions. Behind the scenes, I began preparing. I went through my finances carefully, line by line. I calculated how much I had been giving over the years and how much it had cost me in savings, opportunities, and peace. The number made my stomach twist. I started redirecting my money quietly, paying my own needs first, rebuilding a small safety net, setting boundaries without announcing them. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing. Not my parents. Not my sibling. I learned to answer messages slowly, neutrally. If they asked for help, I said things like, "I'll see what I can do," instead of automatically sending money. Each time I did that, my heart pounded like I was doing something wrong. Years of conditioning don't disappear overnight. The house felt tense, even though nothing had been said out loud. My parents watched me more closely. Their tone shifted, overly polite one moment, slightly irritated the next. My siblings started checking in more often, suddenly interested in how I was doing. It felt rehearsed, unnatural. Inside, I was torn between guilt and relief. Part of me still wanted their approval. Another part was exhausted from chasing it. I started imagining what it would feel like to stop explaining myself altogether. To stop trying to earn fairness. To just step back. At night, I'd lie awake listening to the quiet hum of the house, heart racing, thoughts spinning. I knew something was coming. You can feel it when a long-standing dynamic starts to crack. The air changes. People get uneasy. I hadn't cut them off yet. I hadn't said a word. But the shift had begun. And they could feel it even if they didn't yet understand what it meant. The first real reaction came when I didn't send the money right away. No explanation. No apology. Just nothing. At first, there was confusion. My phone buzzed with a casual message from my mom, "Hey, did you forget about the bill this month?" I stared at it for a long time before replying with a neutral, "I'm busy right now." That was it. No promise. No reassurance. The shift was almost immediate. A few hours later, another message came through. Then another. The tone changed fast, from polite to concerned, then slightly irritated. "We really need to know what's going on." My dad followed up with a call I didn't answer. The house, which had always relied on my quiet reliability, suddenly felt unsteady without it. The next day, the guilt tactics returned, sharper than before. "We're under a lot of pressure," my mom said when I finally picked up. "You know we depend on you." Her voice carried that familiar mix of disappointment and expectation. I said nothing. Just listened. Let the silence stretch until it made her uncomfortable. Soon, panic crept in around the edges. The messages came faster. Longer. More emotional. My sibling even reached out, something they almost never did unless they needed something. "Hey, are you okay?" they asked, followed quickly by, "Things are kind of stressful here." I could almost hear the unspoken request underneath. What struck me was how quickly concern turned into pressure. No one asked how I was doing. No one acknowledged the years I'd carried them. They just wanted the system restored. The money. The stability. The version of me that fixed things. For the first time, I watched it happen from the outside. The scrambling. The confusion. The subtle panic. It was unsettling and strangely clarifying. Without my constant support, everything wobbled. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt numb. And underneath that numbness was something new, clarity. This was never about family unity or mutual care. It was about access. Dependence. The confrontation didn't happen the way I used to imagine it would. No shouting. No dramatic explosion. Just a quiet request from my dad one evening, "We need to talk." His voice carried that forced calm that always meant damage control. I agreed, mostly because I was tired of the silence hanging between us like a loaded question. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one where I'd handed over money for years. The light flickered softly above us. My mom started first, carefully choosing her words. "You've been distant lately," she said. "We're worried." I almost laughed at that. Worried now, when the payments stopped. I told them calmly that I knew about the inheritance. About the paperwork. About the decisions made without me. The air changed instantly. My dad's jaw tightened. My mom's face drained of color. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then came the excuses. "You misunderstood. It's more complicated than that." We were going to explain eventually. Their words tumbled over each other, messy and defensive. I listened quietly, noticing how none of it included an apology. When I asked why I was never included, my mom sighed and said, "You don't need it like your sibling does." That sentence landed harder than anything else. I felt something detach inside me, not anger, not sadness, just clarity. I told them I wasn't asking for money or revenge. I just wanted honesty. My dad snapped that I was being ungrateful. That after everything they'd done, I was turning my back on family. The irony almost hurt. I told them, calmly, that I wasn't cutting them off out of spite. I was stepping back because I finally understood my role. I said I'd spent years proving my loyalty while being quietly excluded from decisions that affected my future. They tried to pull me back with guilt. With fear. With familiar emotional hooks. But something had shifted. Their words slid past me instead of sinking in. When I stood up to leave, my hands were shaking not from fear, but from release. I didn't slam the door. I didn't threaten. I just said, "I need space," and walked out. Behind me, the silence felt heavier than any argument. I didn't announce a cutoff. I didn't send a long message or make a dramatic speech. I simply stopped explaining myself. I stopped justifying my choices. I stopped trying to be understood by people who had already decided who I was useful to them as. At first, the panic on their side intensified. Missed calls. Long texts. Sudden kindness mixed with subtle blame. My sibling tried reaching out again, awkward and indirect, testing whether the old version of me was still available. I kept my responses short. Polite. Distant. The silence did more than any argument ever could. Without my financial support, things unraveled quickly. Bills became emergencies. Tension leaked into every conversation. The stability they'd leaned on for years was gone, and they didn't know how to replace it. Watching that from a distance felt strange, not satisfying, not cruel, just revealing. This was what the system looked like without me propping it up. What surprised me most was how calm I felt. The guilt I'd carried for years started to fade. In its place came relief. Space. Quiet. I started sleeping better. Thinking more clearly. Making plans that didn't revolve around rescuing someone else. For the first time, my money stayed mine. My time felt like my own. I didn't get an apology. I didn't get closure in the way movies promise. But I got something more honest, clarity. I finally saw the pattern for what it was, and I stepped out of it. I used to think walking away meant failing as a son. Now I understand it meant choosing myself for the first time. The inheritance I thought I was owed was never money or property, it was freedom. Self-respect. Boundaries. And the quiet that followed? It wasn't empty. It was peaceful.